Good afternoon. I am Pam Marcucci. I'm the Director for Program Development and Outreach here at the Jacobs Institute. And as such, I'm responsible for our internship programs. So we have a college 2-month internship program, college level students that we call our first gen. And then we have a 1-month high school program that we call our next gen. So thank you all for coming today. We're very excited to show you what the first gen interns have been up to this summer. But first, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to explain how the JI Summer Internship Program is really not a Ponzi scheme. So last summer, I recounted how Allison Kupferman said that we were running an intern Ponzi scheme where we had interns, our interns had interns, and then our interns also had interns. And while it's true that our first gen interns help out a lot with our next gen interns, so here we have Jill teaching them how to use the next gen, how to use the balloon manufacturing equipment, and then we have our biomedical engineering students talking to them about careers in biomedical engineering. And while it's also true that we have our next gen, a couple of whom are up here, help out with the camps that we have coming into the Jacobs Institute. So we've got Gloria helping with this kid that was on this BNMC-wide STEM camp, Max talking to them, Vic and Joey actually showing some college students how to use the endovascular simulator. And then at the top, we have them playing hangman when there was some downtime with the campers. And while I could say that the JI internship program is a kind of Ponzi scheme, because you take the knowledge and passion from one group of people, so the Jacobs Institute and its physicians and partners at UB and at Kaleida, and you pass it on to other people, who pass it on to other people, who pass it on to other people, it's still not technically a Ponzi scheme because nobody loses. And in a Ponzi scheme, definitely people lose. So my son suggested that maybe I could say it's akin to a virus because it just keeps on passing on the knowledge and passion. But I thought that was a pretty unappealing visual. So instead, I thought, okay, actually the JI internship program is more like a stone that creates a ripple effect. So it's knowledge and information and passion that goes from one group of people to another group of people to another group of people. I'm very, very proud of the first gen interns. They have created incredible projects that not only were incredible as deliverables in themselves, but as things that will create ripples in the JI for many years to come. So anyway, I welcome all of you. Enjoy this afternoon, and I'm going to call up Allison to say a few words about the internship program.
Hi, thank you, Pam, and thanks to all of you for spending your Friday afternoon with us. We can't wait for the interns to show you what they've been working on all summer and how they've advanced the JI mission with their projects. This is the 3rd year of our internship program. This year we had 24 applicants from 13 universities and colleges throughout the United States. This is nearly a 3-fold increase from last year, so word must be getting out that we run a pretty phenomenal program here. Even with such a competitive pool of applicants, these 5 interns easily rose to the top. We made very good selections this year. These are some good eggs. They committed with their minds, their hands, and their hearts to what quickly evolved into passion projects for each of them, and it really shows. They generated the title of the program, Internal Advancement, Learn, Innovate, and Educate, and it captures the essence of the summer. Each intern walked into the JI 8 weeks ago and had to learn the background for their project, collaborate with partners, innovate a process, create something, and then go out and educate diverse audiences about what they've made. Diverse audiences including a communication staff member like myself. Noah's project required me to perform surgeries on a medical simulator and 3D printed stroke models, and I was really anxious at first, but he was a very good tutor. Not a day goes by at the Jacobs Institute where I don't learn 5 new things. With the interns here, it is like drinking from a fire hose. They help all of us advance our understanding and our processes because they teach us. That's how the JI learns to improve our innovation. That is the real value in having interns. I think you'll be impressed with what Noah, Jake, Ryan, Adam, and Jill have created this summer. I can't emphasize enough how these 5 all-stars will forever be a part of the JI family. I'm a bit like George Bush around here. I give everybody nicknames or really sort of terms of endearment, and the interns were no exception. Spielberg, J Tweets, Double Double Hubble, AK-47, and Da Vinci made our summer 2016 a spectacular one. So a big thank you to all of you guys from all of us. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce Noah Haran, who had 2 projects this summer, but one of which is to actually highlight this program. So Noah, take it away.
Thank you, Allison. As she mentioned, I had 2 projects this summer. One of my projects was to construct a documentary about the internship process, highlighting what it's like to work here in the Jacobs Institute environment. And so I spent a couple weeks following my friends around with a camera and hovering over their shoulder while they worked. And I was able to condense it down into this. So this is Welcome to the Jacobs Institute, a brief intro into the work that we do here.
The formation of the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus has further strengthened downtown Buffalo's reputation for housing some of the region's finest health and science centers.
One of the finest new centers of innovation can be found right here at the Jacobs Institute.
Strategically located right between a research institute and a university hospital, the Jacobs Institute is uniquely positioned to foster collaboration between physicians, engineers, entrepreneurs, and researchers. With all of these amazing opportunities and resources just an elevator ride away, we can host a unique internship program unlike any other.
My name is Jacob Caldwell. I'm a biomedical engineering student heading into my senior year at UB.
My name is Adam Colleen. I go to Purdue University. I'm a junior studying biomedical engineering there.
So I'm Noah Haran. I'm a senior at the University of Geneseo studying biochemistry.
My name is Ryan Hubble. I am going to school for biomedical engineering at the University of Buffalo.
So my name is Jill Senko. I go to school in Boston. My school name is Wentworth Institute of Technology.
Through our internship program, we aim to bring together determined, dedicated, and motivated students from across the country to work on hand-picked projects across a variety of disciplines.
We basically look for projects that we think will benefit us at the Jacobs Institute, but that will also benefit the intern, whether it's because it's something that they've already done, they're interested in learning more about. Also, we make sure that it's something they can carry away with them as a deliverable, so something that has a beginning and an end.
The interns are allowed to design their projects however they see fit, and are given complete creative control of almost every aspect of moving their idea from concept to completion.
Sure. So I'm working on a 3D printed model of the Circle of Willis for visualization purposes. Currently, we don't have that many models that really represent how the Circle of Willis sits in the brain and its orientation within the skull. So my job is to segment a patient-specific Circle of Willis and 3D print it for a better visualization.
The professionals that work here have been invaluable to the information that I've needed to gather. Heading down into the cath labs, talking to rad techs and fellows, hearing from Drs. Siddiqui, Snyder, and Levy when they lecture, when the various companies are visiting here, getting that real-life application to theoretical knowledge that I already had has been crucial in taking a theory and turning it into a medical reality.
I was really, well, I was lucky enough to come in back in January for a tour, and I just immediately fell in love with the place. From the way you guys described it, it just seemed like such an amazing collaborative space, you know. There were so many collisions going on here, as you guys say, you know, so many resources just around every corner. So I felt that this was a good place to, you know, sort of plant my roots, I guess you could say. And, you know, if I was going to intern anywhere, this place I thought had the most potential to grow in.
I think the most impressive thing or most exciting thing is the amount of interest that the people around the Jacobs Institute take in my work, and the other interns' work as well. We all have very diverse projects. We're not working on the same thing whatsoever, but the entire staff at the Jacobs Institute is all very hands-on, very available, very interested in what we're doing here, and they're all super excited for what we end up delivering them at the end of our project.
The motto of the Jacobs Institute is simple: come innovate with us. We believe that the most progress is made when people work together, so we aim to be more than a center for innovation, but a center for collaboration and inspiration. We want to bring the best and brightest from around the world, and especially right here in Buffalo, working together in a friendly, welcoming environment where invaluable resources are always readily available. So, we invite you to come innovate with us at the Jacobs Institute, where ideas improve lives.
And so I assume you'd recommend this internship to others who are looking to...
Oh, of course, definitely in a heartbeat. Like apply. It won't hurt at all, and if you get accepted, this is just such an awesome place to work. Even just the positive atmosphere, the support that you get from your mentors, from your coworkers, it's just a great day here always. Like, I have never had a bad day here.
All right, so that was just sort of a brief intro into what we do here at the Jacobs Institute. And I actually have I call it a director's cut playing over in the boardroom because they asked me to make them a 5-minute video, and 2 days ago I come to them and say, hey, the video's done. It's 16 minutes long. So they asked me to condense it down a little bit, and that's what you just saw now to save a little time. But we have the other version playing over in the boardroom, so if you want to go check that out when all this is done, you can do that. So to move our presentation forward, I want to welcome up my friend Jake Caldwell, who will start talking to us about the world of medical imaging and the many applications it has here at the GVI. Jake?
All right, thank you very much, Noah. My name is Jacob Caldwell. I am a rising senior biomedical engineer at the University of Buffalo, and my project over the last number of weeks was to develop a medical imaging manual for the Jacobs Institute. So medical imaging, it's ubiquitous throughout the medical field, and the neurovascular realm is no exception. Imaging provides invaluable insight into anatomy, structure, and function that is not available to the naked eye, and has taken previously invasive surgeries to new endovascular heights. So you, being a naturally curious and inquisitive audience, want to know about how medical imaging works. Well, I'm going to need you to be a little more specific. Do you mean X-ray, CT, nuclear medicine, MRI, or ultrasound? Let's start with X-ray, that's familiar. Would you like a projection, a fluoro, or an angio X-ray? Perhaps we'll look at CT. Would you prefer a non-contrast CT, a CT perfusion, or also an angio? And what about MRI? You see, MRI's options are T1, T2, proton density, DWI, flare, MR perfusion, functional MRI, and also angio. So there's a few more options out there, and that doesn't include the ones I don't know about. And we haven't even gone into what medical imaging looks like across modalities. Take MRI, for example. The key in MRI is to remember that fat appears black in an MRI image. Unless, of course, it shows up white. Unless all of it is white. Unless only a little bit is white. Unless it's in color, or unless there's just no fat at all. So let's not worry about the ones that I don't know. I can't tell you much about them anyway. And we can ignore a few more if we narrow our focus down to neurovascular imaging. So there you have it. We can more or less ignore projection X-rays, nuclear medicine, and babies. Needless to say, medical imaging is diverse and complicated for all of us. So why does my project exist? Surely it can't be just to teach you all. Any number of classes can do that. No, my why is the JI's why. Come innovate with us. We want you to come innovate with us. So we seek to equip JI partners with the foundational knowledge necessary to successfully innovate in the neurovascular field. How did we make this goal a reality? We developed a medical imaging manual, a mid-level survey of what modalities exist and how they work, of why we use them at the GVI, how they're used, and what capabilities they can show us. So we know what we were going to create, a medical imaging manual. We know why we did it, foundational knowledge for successful innovation. So the rest of my talk today is going to walk us through the journey of how we made this goal a reality. Now, when the internship began, we knew what we wanted to create, but we didn't know how to deliver it, still under debate. We needed something that was universally accessible to both engineers and sales representatives. It needed to have technical information on each modality while still sitting in a clinically relevant framework. I tried multiple manual structures that would place one priority over the other, but this just resulted in either too much redundancy or not enough information. My solution came when I finally prioritized everything. All aspects were valuable. Rather than try to place one idea into the frame set of another, everything would receive its own small section unto itself. I call this a modular design. If, for example, a JI partner only needed to know how CT perfusion works, we can offer them a clean 2-page front and back explanation on just that modality. They don't need the entire 30-page manual. They don't need to sift through modalities or case files. With the modular design, we can prioritize all information while minimizing the time wasted on undesired information. So this modular design can be broken into two structures, or two sections rather. There's the modality exploration and the clinical application. The modality exploration would walk us through each of the imaging modalities and how they function at a technical level. We'd look at the machinery used to make a signal, how that signal is processed and turned into a final result. After this base knowledge is gained, we move on to the clinical application, where we walk through multiple case files of patients who had an ischemic stroke, comparing images style by style to identify how we can see stroke in what it provides to us. This builds both a technical background and image familiarity as our JI partners develop foundational knowledge on how to analyze imaging in the neurovascular realm. All of this so they can successfully innovate with us. So moving on to the modality exploration portion, I do have to come clean. In this past spring, I was fortunate enough to have taken a Principles of Medical Imaging course taught by Dr. Ken Hoffman at the University of Buffalo. Throughout this coursework, I was given a foundational knowledge on the technical side of medical imaging, showing across the entire medical spectrum how the technical foundation of each imaging modality works, why it has its strengths and weaknesses, and the different challenges each of them face. This information was crucial to the progress of this manual, especially in the modality exploration. But Dr. Hoffman taught me far more than can fit just on 2 pieces of paper. So I had to overcome a challenge, and I was deciding the level of detail. I needed to give this manual somewhere between this and this. The manual still needed to be universally accessible to both sales representatives and engineers, but I couldn't leave out any crucial information that would be non-representative of how the modalities exist and work. So finally, after a lot of forethought and some tinkering, our results looked a little like this. Now please don't try to read it, just take it in visually. I decided to focus on two aspects: creating the signal and creating the image. The text would work through all the materials of how we create a signal in each modality, of how that signal is sent to the body, what is returned, and how we can turn that return into a usable result. I would augment this with figures both laying out either theories or components of the modality or actual clinical results, though they didn't necessarily have to sit in the neurovascular realm. Remember, it's modular, it's general. So after creating this product, I did feel a little bit like an English major. I had done a lot of writing over several weeks on familiar material to a theoretical audience whom I hadn't even met. It's difficult to understand the needs of your customers when you haven't seen them. Then finally, for the first time, I was able to sit in on a meeting with a biotech company that was visiting the JI. As Dr. Siddiqui was discussing some cell biology that was foundational in the use of an MRI technique, I saw the connection between chemical reaction and MRI image. Unfortunately, the sales representatives did not see this connection, and really to no fault on either side. They simply lacked the foundational knowledge as to the function of MRI to make the connection. And perhaps more important, they didn't have enough foundational knowledge to know whether the disconnect sat in the MRI or in the cell biology. And frankly, it was a little bit of both. So during a break, I approached one of the sales reps, we'll call them sales rep Sam, and I asked Sam a little about the misunderstanding. I then went on to explain some of the physics behind MRI, tied it back to the cell biology, and Sam went from puzzled acceptance to true understanding. It was a success. She asked me to explain it again to some of her coworkers, a few of whom had gathered around throughout my first explanation. And finally, I met my audience. This was a crucial interaction that took me from a theoretical goal to a real mission. I knew my audience existed, I knew they needed my product, and I received some great validation in the process. So at this point, I moved past the modality exploration and started to get into the clinical application of the manual. And this is where a lot of my learning took place this summer. You see, when I learned my foundational coursework in imaging, it was medically broad, covering the entire medical field, but not sitting specifically in the neurovascular realm. So I grew comfortable with identifying generalized images from any portion of the medical field. So when I was given a CT image like this, I could identify the ribs and spine, the kidneys and gas pockets in the intestines, and won't lie, where is it? There's an Einstein behind that face, technically. I felt pretty good. But when I came to the JI and was given a CT scan of a head and was told to identify the ischemic stroke, I was a little lost. And granted, it didn't help that in this image an ischemic stroke can't be seen, but you'll have to read my manual to find out why. But nevertheless, I lacked a clinical familiarity to apply my foundational knowledge. But I was surrounded by professionals who had this knowledge in abundance. Meeting with Dr. Zadnan Siddiqui and Ken Snyder, Dr. Jason Davies, Tom Nemeth, rad techs, and more. This was truly a 12-person project, not just one. And these meetings were natural. They were always occurring at the JI already. And Sales Rep Sam is a perfect example. I needed a forum for my questions, and with these meetings with biotech companies, I had to sit in and absorb. It was fantastic and exactly what I needed to gain the information that was required. And better yet, in the absence of these meetings, all of these professionals were at most a floor away from me. All I had to do was go ask them when they had time, of course. And though I thought I'd be lucky to find 15 minutes between them saving one life and the next, they were always very patient in giving me good answers and helping to expand my knowledge because they're interested in our growth as well. I'm very gracious for the help that they gave me, but also for the JI for positioning me so close to such valuable, crucial resources for my project. And this actually developed one of the greatest lessons that I learned throughout this internship, and that was confirming the crucial necessity of an interaction between industry and the medical field. My foundational knowledge had limited success without understanding the needs and current state of the neurovascular realm. And in the same way, biotech companies can't shape their technology unless they also understand the current hindrances and abilities that exist in the neurovascular field. But if they can meet with medical professionals and can gain that sense of reality, they can in turn innovate to challenge the real bounds of what is possible. And better yet, the JI is the junction that unites these two frontiers. They're already bringing together medical professionals and biotech companies to challenge and innovate. And with them, I'm confident that the future will someday make 2011 look like 1895. So after so much talk about these different modalities and analyzing them and recognizing them, I'd like to walk us through analyzing an ischemic stroke in a CT perfusion image, one of my favorite modalities. CT perfusion is a modality that pumps a contrast agent through your head vasculature and then performs a CT scan that while the contrast agent flows, generates several images based on how the agent was flowing through your head. This generates 6 images, which can be a little daunting, but for today's purposes, we're just going to focus on 3. That's in the top right, time to peak, cerebral blood flow in the bottom left, and cerebral blood volume in the top center. So starting in the top right with time to peak. Time to peak is a measurement of how long it takes for contrast to reach a certain area of the brain, with a scale from purple and black meaning a low time, up to red meaning a high time. So if we focus in on this yellow oval seen here, we see a lot of red in that hemisphere of the brain. That indicates an increased time it's taking this contrast to flow to that portion of the brain, and therefore gives us an idea of a potential region of concern. With that potential region marked out, we can move on to the bottom left to our cerebral blood flow, which is a measurement of how quickly the contrast agent is moving through the brain. If we look to our same area of concern in our yellow oval, we instead see a lower spectrum. We see blue, meaning there's low flow throughout that portion of the brain. This confirms that the brain is not receiving as much blood as it normally does, and confirms that our region of concern is in fact within that yellow oval. But what we don't know is whether or not all that tissue is viable or non-viable. If the tissue is already non-viable, then no intervention will serve any purpose. It's simply too late. But if the tissue is viable, then intervention may be able to help that patient to make a recovery. So to gain this final answer, we move on to our top middle, our cerebral blood volume, where cerebral blood volume measures how much blood is sitting in a given region of the brain. So if we first look at this top red circle, the top half of our region of concern, we see blue, purple, and even some black. At this point, there's little to no blood sitting in that region of the brain. The tissue is non-viable, and it's too late to intervene. But if we look down to the green circle in the bottom half of our region, we see some green, yellow, and even areas of red. This region is still alive with blood and still has a chance, given intervention, to potentially salvage some tissue and make a recovery. All of this information coming from one technique of one modality of the entire web that you saw at the beginning of my presentation. Imagine what we can do if we understand all of them. Naturally, if I had some more time, there are a few ways I'd like to see my project grow. I think there's some other things we can add to this manual to increase our foundational knowledge for JI partners. At the GVI, we're a little spoiled because we grow used to seeing images of our head where half of the brain vessels are just missing. But if you don't have a familiarity with what the head looks like when it's normal, it's hard to identify when it's not. Therefore, in addition to the manual of a normal versus abnormal comparison across modalities, showing the head what it looks like when it's healthy and when it's not, can really help our understanding and identifying whether or not someone is suffering and to what degree. The clinical application portion, as I mentioned, focus in on an ischemic stroke, but that's not the only procedure seen here at the GVI. I'd love to expand it with the same process being followed for a hemorrhagic stroke and an aneurysm to give a better idea of the breadth of procedures delivered here at this institute. And finally, the manual as it stands now is very functional in appearance. It has the information across, but I think a little aesthetic appeal, some more development on the bells and whistles can really make it more engaging and approachable to our audience. Now, my goal was simply to provide foundational knowledge for successful innovation among our partners and anyone that might read this manual. But what the rest of our interns today are going to show you is what happens when you already have this foundational knowledge. And that's going to begin with Ryan Hubble, who's going to start building on this foundation by showing what happens when we take a 2D image into the 3D realm. And he's going to take what's visible on the screen and start putting it in the palm of our hands. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome Ryan Hubble to the front.
Thank you, Jake. Hello, my name is Ryan Hubble. I am currently entering my first year as a master's student at the University at Buffalo in biomedical engineering. This is actually my second internship through the Jacobs Institute. I was an intern here last summer, and I completed my senior design project through the Jacobs Institute as well. So part of the JI's mission to improve the treatment of vascular disease in Western New York begins with education. The Jacobs Institute hosts a variety of educational events and tours where they talk to students or any individual about strokes, heart attacks, or aneurysms, and how the doctors within the Gates Vascular Institute treat these diseases. During my time at the Jacobs Institute, I have had the opportunity to help out with these events and do my part in educating the community. And so part of educating about these diseases involves learning about the anatomy involved. And as you can imagine, the body is full of tons of blood vessels, and these blood vessels can be difficult to explain and difficult to understand how they sit within the human body. When talking about neurovascular problems in general, there's a key piece of anatomy formed by a few arteries called the circle of Willis. When you're talking about aneurysms or strokes or AVMs, this is a key piece of anatomy because a lot of the problems stem from this piece of anatomy. So the circle of Willis is formed from the carotid arteries in the front and the basilar artery in the back. And this forms a loop that then feeds the rest of the brain its blood supply. And what's important about this is that if a patient were to have a clot in his or her carotid artery causing a stroke, blood flow can still reach the rest of the brain because of this redundancy. So therefore, the patient will not risk major brain damage. So currently, it's very difficult to explain the circle of Willis. All the images are only two-dimensional, so it's hard to conceptualize their height, width, and depth. And physical models usually only have the circle of Willis as a flat cross-section sitting at the base of the brain. So it is tricky to understand how this is fed from the arteries ascending into it and how the rest of the arteries reach the rest of the brain. So as you can see in these images, each one of these is trying to explain the circle of Willis in a different way, but it's still difficult to understand what they're trying to orientate you with. So needless to say, the Jacobs Institute wanted a better visual for this. They also thought this would be a good opportunity to use their new multi-material 3D printer. So I was tasked with creating a better visual. They allowed me the freedom and flexibility to create what I believe to be the best model for this. And so during this past year, I worked in a senior design project where I helped create a patient-specific 3D printed flow model that doctors could use for surgical planning. The doctors use these to practice and prepare for upcoming surgeries. So I had a little bit of background in how I was going to start this project. So I went down the same path. So the Jacobs Institute has a library full of de-identified patients' medical imaging. So I consulted with Karen Mace, a Kubrick engineer who works within the JI, to determine which image would be the best to work from. So we looked at patients who had an ideal circle of Willis, as these all vary from patient to patient. Once we found a good image to work from, we wanted to separate what we thought was relevant from the rest of the image. This is called segmentation. As you can see in these images, there is a lot going on. But the Jacobs Institute envisioned this model being within a transparent skull. So I knew that the two most important pieces of anatomy we wanted to take from these images were the blood vessels and the patient's skull. And as you can see, how we do this is each piece of anatomy within the brain is associated with different light intensities. So we select a range of light intensities and essentially extract them from the rest of the image, as seen here with the blood vessels. And once these are taken from the image, we have to clean them up using a program called Mesh Mixer. So essentially, this program you use to either fill in holes, to smooth out rough surfaces or even reconstruct. As you can see in the top left video, I am reconstructing the patient's teeth. This patient had a metal filling, which then created a large error in the image, which made the teeth almost unrecognizable. In the top right image, I am reconstructing the bridge of the model's nose. And in the bottom video, I am connecting two different patients' blood vessels. And that was done because there was features from each of the patient's blood vessels that I wanted to include in my model. And during this procedure, I acted as if I was a dentist, a nose surgeon, and a neurosurgeon. So once all of the images are cleaned up, there's a few design decisions we have to make. And at first, we envisioned this skull being completely hollow, but we soon found out this wasn't going to work, as the blood vessels within the brain are very tiny and they would simply just snap off. Also, the material we print in has to be polished before it can be visibly seen. So if the model were to be hollow, we would have to polish both the inside and outside surface, and that would be very difficult. So we made the decision to print the skull in a solid form. This video here is showing a time lapse of the whole progress of me cleaning up this model. Roughly, this took between 50 and 60 hours total. And along the way, I had to learn different techniques with the assistance of the staff who was familiar with these. And here's the final product. So to test the clarity of a solid skull model, we test printed this prism with blood vessels in it, one to see how visible the solid print would be, as well as what color we should print the blood vessels in that would be the most visible. Also, we test printed the sphere to see if curved surfaces like those seen on the skull would be visible as well. Then we made this decision to detach the skull from the rest of the model. This was made for a couple different reasons. One, this would be a lot easier to polish once it's post-printed. If the model was standing upright, it would be very difficult to get a good grip on it and polish it. The second is that it is more user-friendly. Anyone who is looking at this can take the skull right off, simply look at it from the base and see how the blood vessels going into the rest of the brain, as well as put it back on and see how they ascend into the brain. And so I did this first by detaching the jaw, which I created these two pins on the side and subtracted cylinders within the skull and the jaw so that the pins would fit in. So when printed, you could simply put the pins back in and it becomes a full model again. Also to do this, I had to create these connector pieces that you see up here. These are located on the top of the blood vessels and spine that are supporting the model and on the base of the skull so that they fit right in. I also had to subtract the blood vessels from the rest of the image, and since this will be a transparent skull, this will not affect the clarity of the image. The next step for creating this model is 3D printing. So recently, the Jacobs Institute has acquired a Objet 500 Connex 3 multi-material 3D printer. And this machine works by laying down material layer by layer until it finally reaches its final height. Each of these layers is finer than a single piece of human hair. And the print job was estimated to take about 59 hours. This is a video showing the printer laying down the first few layers of material. But unfortunately, about 14 hours into the print, there was a printer malfunction and the print job was canceled. But the printer is currently being worked on and we should be printing it within the next couple of weeks. But on top of that project, I also used my experience at the JI, my educational background, and a project management workshop I took this last spring to serve as a project manager for the 4 college interns and 4 of the high school interns. In this role, I would sit down with the interns individually on a weekly basis and basically scope out their projects, what was in scope, what was out of scope, ensure that long-term goals and weekly goals were being met, ensure that resources that they needed were allocated appropriately, and ensure that anything else, all timelines and deliverables were being created. So one of the documents I created during this position was the project charter. And what this essentially does is initialize the project. So this defines what the project is, what the main goals, deliverables, and outcomes are from the project, as well as what's in and out of scope, etc. And the next document is what I used on the weekly basis. So I would sit down with the interns and ask them what they accomplished during the week, were there any unmet goals for any reason, what their action plan for the next week was, as well as if there was any resources they needed, whether it was equipment, computer software, or time with staff members. And we also created Gantt charts, which are essentially project timelines. So this would ensure that there was a clear path to project completion, as well as give the interns a real good idea of where they should be throughout the project. And with this, I will hand it off to Noah, who will talk a little bit more about his work with the flow models I mentioned previously in my presentation. There you go.
All right, thank you, Ryan. So, Ryan talked a little bit about this in his presentation, but one of the most valuable tools that we have at our disposal here at the Jacobs Institute are things called flow models. And I actually have one right here on the table. You can see what these are patient-specific replicas of your specific anatomy. So the way they work is we can take a patient in for a CAT scan and scan their anatomy. And we can convert that in our computers into a 3D model, clean it up in a program, and then run it through our multi-material 3D printer. So what we're left with is a 1-to-1 scale perfect replica of your specific anatomy, or your anatomy, or your anatomy. So these, in terms of training tools, surgical prep tools, these are invaluable, and we love using these. You can see on here on screen we have a replica of an aortic arch. We have some of the cerebral arteries. We have, so how we use them is we take them, and you can see some of the tubing extending off of this model right here. We hook it up to a pulsatile water pump to simulate blood flow. That pushes water through the model. We can put it under live x-rays to simulate live fluoro in a real procedure. And then we can feed real tools into it to perform a simulated procedure on it. So why are these so valuable? Again, they're incredibly, incredibly realistic. Like I said, these are 1-to-1 replicas of patient-specific anatomy. So even down to the texture of the vessels themselves, they are incredibly realistic. They give great feedback. And in terms of realism, these are as close as we can get to actually opening up a live patient. They're also, like I said, very individualized. Since they're all patient-specific, we can have cases as unique as the patients they come from. Difficult vessels to work through, different cases, different types of problems. If it's a problem that you have, we can scan it, print it, and work on it. They're also very reproducible. Say if one breaks, we can send an order to get a new one in and have a new one on the table in 24 hours. So they are, in terms of training and surgical prep tools, they are invaluable. But as valuable as they are, a realistic setup, or a realistic procedure rather, requires a realistic setup. And that is a very extensive process that is hard for one person to tackle on their own. Say we're doing a clot retrieval. Well, we actually need to get a real clot from upstairs in the Toshiba labs. You can see one right there. It's kind of nasty, I'll cover that up. Say you want to use live fluoro. Well, live fluoroscopy and x-rays require you to wear 3-piece lead shielding on your thyroids, guts, and your groin. Say you want to run some water through it. You have to flush the model, you have to flush your tools. So it does. It requires a lot of setup, and you need a team to back you up if you want to put one of these together. Thankfully, here at the JI, we have great teams to back us up, but for just one person, it would take hours to set this up and tear it down, do your specific procedure. So that's why this right here is so valuable. One of our newest and most innovative tools, the Mentis Endovascular Surgery Simulator. And what it is exactly that. It's a surgical simulator. Right in there in the housing, or in the casing, is housed a computer in which are simulated dozens and dozens of different surgical cases on all manner of different types of anatomy. We have aneurysms, we have clot retrievals, we have carotid artery stenting. If you can think of it, this can simulate it. And you feed in real physical tools right at those orange access ports, and the physical tools are then simulated inside your virtual patient. So, in a word, here you can see the sensor bar. All your physical tools are fed into the sensor before they're simulated inside the virtual model. So in a word, why this system is so valuable, it's self-contained. Anybody can walk in, and in a half hour, they can set up, do their procedure, and be done. There's no x-ray, there's no blood clots, there's no fluoro. It's all inside this system, so anybody can use it. High school interns can use it, and they do use it. We've encouraged them, even people walking through on tours, we encourage them to try out a procedure. So in terms of being able to quickly and efficiently teach the process of these procedures that we do here every day, the Mentis is invaluable. But the question is, how valuable? Like Jake said before, my why is the JI's why. Why do we have this system here? Why is it valuable? So that was the question that we sought to answer through our experiment. What impact would a training program on the Mentis simulator have on a random participant, a group gathered from around the JI? Can we train our participants on this simulator and teach them to perform these procedures on the level of neurosurgical fellow? So that's where that left us with our project goals, to validate the effect that training on the Mentis has on an individual by putting them through regular training on both the Mentis simulator and the 3D printed flow models, and then evaluating their performance over time to see if there was any significant change. So designing the experiment, I was fortunate enough to work with both Reese James, one of our clinical training engineers here, as well as some of the representatives from Mentis, the company themselves, who helped me refine my experimental design to answer some of the questions that they had as well, seek out some answers that they had been looking for. So what we were left with was we were going to take a group of 7 participants selected from just around the staff at the JI, and we were actually lucky enough to have one neurosurgical fellow join us, Hussein Shalani. And we were going to put them through 3 weeks of regular and structured training on both the Mentis simulator and the 3D printed flow models. At each procedure, we would evaluate them based on a number of criteria changing each week, and I'll describe that a little more in detail in a few slides. And the procedure we would have them do each time was a stroke retrieval with a device called a stentriever and an aspiration catheter. So we're going into the brain vasculature and pulling out a clot. So that was the plan. And at the very end, we would collect the data and analyze it to see if the training program had had a statistically significant impact on their proficiency performing these procedures. So on the Mentis specifically, we had them practice on a number of different anatomies just to get them acquainted with patient-specific anatomy, 1 in the right ICA and 2 in the left MCA. On the flow models, we would just kind of put the clot in the system and let it fall where it may and see if they can identify and retrieve the clot using the skills they learned on the Mentis in the actual 3D models. So the real physical tools we used, you can see down here listed, including Marksman microcatheters, Penumbra 5 Max aspiration catheters, long sheets, and other fantastic devices that our biomedical engineer Karen Mace was kind enough to provide for us. So we supplied them with this and we sent them to work, and over 3 weeks we had them perform this procedure again and again, and we recorded the data and saw how they performed over time. And when the data collection was done, we got a chart that looked like this. And so you can see each week the criteria changed, and we call this a tiered proficiency evaluation. So, for example, week 1, you can see the only things we were evaluating were completion time, did they complete it in under 30 minutes, but then in week 2, we add some more layers to it. How much time did they spend in X-ray? Because you want to minimize X-ray during a procedure. Did their time decrease from the last procedure? Are they improving? And then in week 3, we had the most categories of all, where we evaluated the number of roadmaps they did, which is a procedure you can do to highlight the vasculature. The amount of contrast agent they used. Did their fluoro time decrease? And at each procedure, we also added a qualitative side to it. How many questions did they ask? How was their confidence in performing the procedure on a scale of 1 to 10? How did they rate themselves? How did we rate them as an outside observer? So we collected all of this data, and at the end of the program, we ran over it to see if it supported our hypothesis. And we were left with a couple conclusions. First of all, you can see here a graph of the individual times at each procedure, and it looks a little bit all over the place. Obviously, running this program over just 3 weeks and with 7 participants, we didn't have enough data to actually do a proper statistical analysis. But from this data, we can make some pretty significant inferences. Starting out all the way over here at week 1, the first procedure, the times were scattered. Any time ranging from 8 minutes all the way up to 35. So that is a wide range, and some of them were taking very, very long. But then moving throughout the program, you can see them sort of, well, first of all, they generally decrease, and even more, they condense. They're more regular. Everybody's in the same range. The range is much smaller. So what that's showing is not only are they getting more proficient at these procedures, but they're also all reaching the same skill level, which is great because that's what we wanted to achieve. We wanted everybody to learn the same procedure and reach the same level of proficiency. But the most important data that we gathered wasn't the numbers, but rather the qualitative side of it, the confidence. Looking at the participants over time as they rated themselves, a universal increase in confidence from week 1 to the very end. You can see increasing from our star student, Allison, right here, Allison Kupferman, started at a 1 all the way down at the bottom, and by the end, she was all the way up at, I believe it was an 8, a 7, and an 8, yes. So at every participant that I had, I saw them move from having to be handheld throughout every procedure, having instructions at every step, and by the end of the program, they were totally self-sufficient, running these procedures on their own, which is great. That means that they're learning this procedure, they're learning what they have to do, and they are confident enough in their own abilities to perform the procedure all on their own. And that is ultimately what we wanted to achieve. So the main conclusions that we drew away from this study. First of all, training on the Mentis does improve your time. You become more proficient over time as you perform these procedures again and again. And the same effect is seen with the flow models. As you perform this again and again, you become more proficient each time. You're learning a little more. But perhaps one of the most important takeaways that we have, a little inference that we made, is that we shouldn't take the Mentis and the flow models just as 2 separate systems. Because they both work, while they work in similar ways, they also teach very, very different things. You see, because the Mentis, as self-contained as it is, it's a very useful system, but it's not very realistic, but it is exceptional for teaching the procedure, the steps, what to do when. The flow models, on the other hand, with their high degree of realism, are essential for learning the finer details of a process, how to maneuver your tools, how to respond to unforeseen consequences of moving something in the wrong vessel, injecting something in the wrong, any manner of unforeseen circumstances. You can learn how to respond to them with these flow models and their high degree of realism. So what we say is that the Mentis and the flow models are 2 halves of the same whole. Using them together to teach both the procedure and the technique, we believe we can craft a training program that can really serve to enhance the skills of any participant, whether they be a total novice or already an expert. So why was this useful? Obviously, it was nice to do, but it has to have some value to it. First of all, a learning opportunity for the JI staff. One of the main things that we love to do here at the JI is bring medical device companies through and teach their sales representatives how to use their devices. And we use the flow models very, very often because, again, the high degree of realism shows them what it would actually be like in a real procedure. So by teaching the Jacobs Institute staff how to perform these procedures, they now can go forward with more confidence to teach these companies that come through how to use their devices. Again, it was also a validation of the Mentis and the flow models as training tools. We love to talk about them and how valuable they are, but putting numbers behind it and actual user experiences adds a whole new layer of validity to our claims. Also, it was a learning opportunity for me. When I started here back in June, I had no idea what an aspiration catheter was. I didn't know how a stent retriever worked, let alone how to use them both in conjunction in an anatomical model to retrieve a clot. It was an amazing, amazing learning experience for me that I would not have gotten anywhere else. And finally, it was not just running the procedure and learning how to perform clot retrieval, but learning how to run an experiment, how to actually coordinate people and collect data to reach an end goal, an invaluable experience to going forward into graduate school and beyond. Speaking of moving into the future, there's some things that we'd like to consider going forward, say if we ever run this procedure again. First of all, more time. If I had 6 months to work with instead of 2, I could have expanded my roster of participants, I could have expanded the number of trials I did. More data, which is better, because in the end, more data you have, the better you can run your statistical analysis. Again, better scheduling, because being busy at the Jacobs Institute is not out of the ordinary, and people are in 5 places at once on any given day. So we had to craft a schedule that accounted for that, and we left a lot of wiggle room, so if you had to cancel, you could always make it up. And finally, improving the realism of the Mentis. We think that as valuable as the Mentis is and as self-contained as the system is, it lacks some of the features, the finer details that you get from working on the flow models. So just some minor things that we could take into consideration to improve the experience going forward and get it closer to what it's actually like to run one of these experiments. Oh, also a control group, which is just a baseline group against which to compare our results from other experiments. So that was the end of my study. I would like to thank, again, all my wonderful participants for putting up with my emails for 3 weeks. And now it's my pleasure to hand the podium over to Ryan Hubble, who's going to take 3D print, Adam Colleen, who's going to take 3D printing into the next dimension, printing models of the brain's ventricular system for treatment of hydrocephalus. Thank you. Good luck, Ryan.
I'm just going to kill the mic system because that buzz is killing me. Good. All right, so my name's Adam Colleen, and my project actually began with something that was very important to me, and it starts with hydrocephalus. So hydrocephalus is a condition in which there's fluid buildup in the brain, and it causes an intracranial pressure. There's a lot of male effects that this increased pressure causes. And it's very prevalent in pediatrics. So children go through their entire lifetime with dozens of revisionary surgeries, developmental challenges that they go through. It's not easy, and severe pain at some times. I'm very familiar with this because my youngest brother, Jimmy Colleen, was born with this. So my family, it's very routine for us. The treatment for hydrocephalus is not ideal. The primary option is a shunt implant. And what this is essentially a tube that runs from the brain, tunnels under your skin, and leads to your abdomen, where cerebral spinal fluid, which is produced in the brain, can be reabsorbed. Otherwise, the fluid would continue to build up in the ventricular system, pictured here, which causes the intracranial pressure. There it is. The problem with these shunts is that they clog a lot. Just this past year, my brother had a revisionary surgery performed by Dr. Renee Reynolds. And the process wasn't easy. You're in the hospital. It takes a long time. It's painful. Ours was marred with infection. And the fact of the matter is that we had it easy. Jimmy's shunt lasted 15 years. Over 50% of shunts fail within the first 2 years. And as an aspiring biomedical engineer, I mean, those results are embarrassing, honestly. In the 21st century, we're capable of so much more. We have the technology to increase this, but our capabilities haven't proven that so far. So my project for this summer was very passion-driven, and it was designed for me to use our 3D printing technologies to further the research in hydrocephalus treatment. I was given pretty much free rein with how I wanted to do this. I wasn't told what to do. I was just given a lot of resources with how to do it. The JI was the perfect place for me to do this. I'm surrounded with expert engineers. I'm surrounded with physicians that I have access to and relationships with. I'm surrounded with lab space filled with UB researchers upstairs who are willing to share their lab space and give help where it's necessary. And of course, we have that fantastic 3D printer that Ryan was talking about earlier. So I began with the same process that Ryan used with using actual MRI scans from patients. This is a 320 slice MRI going from the neck up to the top of the cranium. and separating out the ventricular system, which is pictured here in purple. So this ventricular system was separated and then turned into a three-dimensional model on the computer screen. This is the shape of the ventricular system. It's hollowed out within the brain and it fills with fluid, cerebrospinal fluid. My first prototype was to design a PIV model out of these ventricles. PIV is a method, a technique, I suppose, to map how a fluid flows through a model, in this case, a model of the ventricles. The idea was to validate the work of Richard Izzo, who's a PhD student currently at UB, whose senior design project was presenting a model, a computerized model, of how fluid flows through the ventricles and eventually through a shunt catheter, in the end optimizing the shape of the catheter to create the most amount of flow. The idea of this was to make a three-dimensional model which would validate his work. So taking what he did on the computer screen and making it in the real world. The problem is that 3D printing isn't usually used for PIV necessities. PIV is a very intricate process. And learning how to make this model took a long time, a huge learning curve, obviously. I didn't know anything about 3D modeling or whatever. But as I became more acquainted with it and as I printed it and finished it, you realize all the problems that there were and why 3D printing is not used. The material that it was printed out of, although it's clear, was not clear enough. The surface, which I went through incredible pains to make as smooth as possible, was simply not smooth enough. And this is the result that I brought to Rick Izzo and Mike Springer, our Director of Entrepreneurship and Operations here. And I said, look, these are the roadblocks. This is why my model won't work. And it won't work until we fix these things. And I kind of looked at this as a failed experiment. I was kind of stumped. But what happened was they looked at it as more of a success. I delivered a whole new realm of techniques that had yet to be explored in the Jacobs Institute. I gave a lot back in terms of experience and expertise using the 3D printer, kind of opening our eyes to the capabilities that we do and do not have here, things to move towards in the future. With about 3 weeks left, I decided it was time to pivot my project. The PIV model seemed like a dead end. We had a meeting with Mike Springer, Rick Izzo, Dr. Renee Reynolds, who had actually done my brother's revisionary surgery, and Dr. Evan Winograd, who's a fifth-year resident neurosurgeon here. And I learned about, I'm sorry, this is incorrect. This would be endoscopy, endoscopic third ventriculostomies. It's an alternative method of treatment for hydrocephalus, where instead of implanting a shunt which drains fluid from your brain to your abdomen, it's poking an organic hole pretty much in the floor of the third ventricle. So the process is this. You burrow a hole in the skull, you insert an endoscope, which is a rod-like camera, through the brain tissue into the ventricles. You navigate to the floor of the third ventricle, and then you just puncture a small hole, which would allow drainage. Now, there's contraindications, reason you can't do this in everyone, but it's an alternative method that's growing as people become more well acquainted with it. And I looked at this as an opportunity and a need that the Jacobs Institute could address. So I began 3D modeling again. I took a brain, I took my ventricles, which I had already modeled, placed them within my brain, I made a skull casing, and then I specified my brain so that this endoscopic third ventriculostomy would actually be possible to run on this 3D printed prototype. And so this is the inside of the ventricles. I needed to represent anatomy as accurately as possible. This is the foramen of Monroe, the choroid plexus, intercerebral veins that are visible when you're looking through an endoscope. These are shots from an actual endoscope. So my 3D model had to represent that as accurately as possible. This was my result. You can't see the inside, but the inside is also intricately designed to represent actual anatomy. This is a pink, soft brain material fixtured within my solid skull, and it has an ability to actually pump fluid into the brain to make it pulsate, like an actual brain. I was able to get this model into the OR with Dr. Evan Winograd and run an ETV on this model. Here, he's actually taking the endoscope, navigating within the brain. He's checking out the anatomy. He's finding where he is. You can see the fluid pulsing through the model. Here he's poking the hole in the floor of the third ventricle. You get a little vision of that magenta right there. That's the basilar artery, something that the surgeon must be very careful not to damage during the surgery. And this process was fantastic. I learned a lot from him doing it. He gave me fantastic feedback. He let me actually run the operation. So here I am using the endoscope. He's telling me what I should and should not be looking for, pointing out mistakes and things that I did well, teaching me how to hold the endoscope. And this is where my project really came together. It was kind of the capstone moment because this was the purpose of the model in the first place. I was someone who had no endoscopic experience whatsoever, and I get to use this model, which was designed specifically to train endoscopy, and I walked out feeling very comfortable with using an endoscope, knowing how it works, and kind of understanding how to explore the inside of the brain. So we got all kinds of feedback, and there's a really great platform for us to move off from this project. The brain was printed in a texture that felt realistic, according to Evan. It represented anatomy well. He pointed out things that should be added in future generations of this model. And it did what it was supposed to do. It taught endoscopy very well. A thing that I like is that this brain is very modifiable and reprintable in-house so that we can design these ventricles to have whatever anatomy or whatever specifications that we would like to see. So like our endovascular models are very customizable, so with this brain. I'm very proud of my project. I think that what I delivered was an increased capability of our 3D printing here at the JI. So we learned a lot, and I passed on a lot of my experience to the people who use this equipment every day. Karen, Rick. I think that I provided a platform for the JI to move to a new area. We're very focused in the endovascular realm, neuroendovascular specifically, and this is a opportunity for us to branch off into other explorations of neurohealth. And it provides us a way to actually use this model, like we do endovascular training labs, actually use this model, printed in-house, like our endovascular models, to run training labs and teach residents, interns, medical students, whoever it may be, how to do these endovascular techniques. So that was my project. I can't thank the JI enough for giving me this experience. The 2 months here have been absolutely fantastic. With that, I'd like to pass the mic to Jill, who has done a ton of work during her project to move the JI to the next step, developing the Idea to Reality Center here.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Jill Senko. So coming here in the summer of 2016 for June, I was gifted with the project of the balloon manufacturing equipment here housed in our JI's I2R. So, oops. What is our I2R space? So our future vision, which will come to reality very, very soon in this upcoming month, is our space or center where we can bring in innovators, entrepreneurs, local and regional, even national medical companies and medical device companies to bring their ideas and actually make a reality. So bring in their idea and make a prototype, make a viable quality product that they can undergo testing with all of our 3D models that you've just learned about. So then as we move forward, what is a balloon dilatation catheter? What is this equipment going to do and succeed? So this is a great animation of how a balloon catheter works. As you can see, it's threaded along a micro guide wire that is then snaked through this artery or vessel, and it's going to come to our area of plaque or stenosis. So this plaque buildup is going to be pushed open. This vessel has a limited blood flow as of right now. But the physician will place our balloon, as you can see here, and inflate and deflate the balloon with saline. The vessel will expand, and the plaque does not get removed, but it just opens up to allow for that blood flow. Also, balloon catheters can be used for deliverables of stents, as you can see here. So this mesh stent will open up and expand and hold that shape to keep our vessel open again for the blood flow. And then in terms of what type of catheter we're going to have for our primary assembly at the JI, it's called a rapid exchange catheter, and a nice technical picture is right here. And then for facts about our 2015 GVI records for our interventional procedures in our cath labs downstairs right below you, for our coronary procedures, almost 7 catheters were used per day specifically our balloon catheters, which is amazing. So that just shows you how frequently these are actually used in the coronary space. Then we look into our neuro space over here, and you can see that our intracranial PTA procedure only has a 13.6 procedure rate. So that's a very low number just because our intracranial vessels are so delicate and fragile that this inflation, deflation of the balloon may cause rupture of that vessel. Then looking at our equipment layout. So how is this lab going to be set up? Our lab is equipped with 10 machines from Confluent Medical Technologies. They are the gold standard right now, still today, in balloon technology. And also larger companies that are very well known have this in-house equipment, which is awesome for the JI because now we have that capability. And then as you can see, these are the capabilities which our lab will offer our users that when we bring them in. And then the starred icons are the machines I primarily focused on. So parison and balloon forming, welding, and also testing. And then looking at our logistics, so how are we actually going to build our balloon catheter? It is a very complicated assembly, as it says here, 20 steps and 33 materials. As you can see here, this is one of our catheters that was made in a training program a few months ago. And this over here is our proximal end, so the end that would be into the body, and then over here is our distal end that our surgeon or physician would use during the procedure. Might need this. And then these are representative of what materials go where for this assembly. And then interesting fact for our cost per catheter, it's roughly $23. So that is that catheter in its raw material state as you see it. But when you're thinking about manufacturing and time and also the other entities that you don't see on that catheter but see in these circles, that's an upwards of $80. And then looking at larger corporations that actually manufacture these in a huge quantity, it's almost $1,000 and upwards from there maybe. Now looking at how are we going to make this a functional lab space. We have the assembly, we have the machines. What's the starting point? So this is a nice picture of what our lab is and the main machines we got to turn on. And then ensuring that they function properly was a big task, but it was a very fun task to definitely look for. Thank you to Karen Mace. This would not have been easy without her. She was a huge help in this. And then as we move forward to documentation, we made training protocols, maintenance logs, calibration logs, as well as these two posters here. Bigger versions will be housed in our lab for users to come. And then we look at our raw materials. So 33 raw materials had to be acquired for this process. As you can see here, there's a picture, but it was a great learning experience for me to look into how businesses and corporations actually pay for things, quotes, and how, again, this payment process works. And then lastly, looking at the capabilities of how we're going to run this lab and what we'll offer to our users in the future. Now looking at our actual machinery that I got to turn on. So our first machine is the computerized parison stretcher. And as this animation plays, it'll inform you of how this parison is made. And a parison is a segment of tubing, as you can see on these black boards, that will be stretched and heated to form a distressed specific segment of our tubing. And this is an intermediate step before we do our balloon forming process. So when we do our balloon forming, it's another machine called the balloon forming machine, as in the title. And you can see here, this is our mold. And there's also cycles of heat, pressure, stretch, and there's a cooling cycle to ensure that we form a balloon of the correct size. And as you can see here as it plays, this is where the balloon would be stretched so that parison is more so distressed. And then it's easier to blow our balloon with nitrogen pressurized air. And then a annealing or a cooling process occurs where that balloon is then cooled so it's easy for the user to take out the balloon from our mold. So then we look into how can we test this balloon? How do we ensure it's a good functional balloon? How is it going to be a quality product? So that's when our hydraulic pressure tester comes in. In its name, we use pressure and water. You attach it to the machine with a two-way burst fitting. You purge out the air bubbles, so you're going to push the air bubbles out to get the best and accurate reading of pressure, as this machine tests for burst pressure, compliance, and leaks. And then there are failures, so there are alarms that will sound if there's a leak or a burst that the machine will indicate to the user. And then lastly, looking at our tubing welding machine, this is one of the most versatile machines in that there are 20 steps and 7 of those steps are welding steps. This machine performs 5 of those steps, so it's very, very versatile. And as you can see here, this weld spot is a good visual from our camera, as right here, this little light. It's projected onto a monitor for the user to see. And then this procedure is actually very, very intricate. So as you can see here, this is a clean weld, and then this is an incorrect weld. It looks like a bug kind of took a bite out of it, but that's almost a tear where the assembly was either incorrect or the welding jaws came down too hard or was too hot on the weld. The plastic is very, very delicate. And so here is a visual of the actual assembly. So I talked about it, so how do we actually do it? So here's parison forming. This is our machine. You can see the heater jaws will come out, and we have to trim our balloon to fit within our mold over here. So you thread it in like a needle. You turn your machine on, let the program run. Each machine has a program, and they can store up to almost 20 programs for users to change. And then after balloon forming, we have a balloon, and again, you want to test it to make sure of burst pressure, leaks, and how compliant it is. And then you're going to trim it for welding. So then welding prep is actually, again, a very intricate process. There are 4 materials that you have to include in this assembly before you actually load it into our machinery. So you use a mantros. The metal will prevent the plastic from welding onto itself, a welding sleeve to protect the outside entities, again, from welding onto itself. And then you take it out of your machine, and you have your weld. So why is all this machinery actually important for the JI to have? It offers a very new dynamic and a great foundation to build upon. As we already have our testing capabilities in our 3DP, now we have a new capability of actually making in-house medical devices such as balloon catheters. Also, various machinery can be added to make different types of tipping to our catheters. And then also what you may be asking, what are the actual opportunities of innovation? What will our users do with balloon catheters? How will they actually innovate? Some things to keep in mind are the balloon size for different procedures. The neurospace, as I said, that 13.6% is a huge space for innovation and more to come on the design. Also attachments and various material testing. So drug-eluting balloons that could be porous, that will offer, again, a new space of innovation. So with all of this being said, I've enjoyed my time here at the JI. I thought it was fantastic. And I'd like to invite my fellow interns up for some closing remarks.
So this summer, our projects all varied and were very diverse, but they centered around our title, Internal Advancement. We as interns have all grown and developed over the past 9 weeks, better equipping us for the future. However, all of our projects also serve the future of the Jacobs Institute and anyone else who's using this space. We all grow, we all win, we all advance. At this point, I would like to welcome any questions any of you may have. Should be working now.
Okay. My question's for Adam. I like how you spoke about developing methods.
Not worth it. Not worth it.
I like how you spoke about developing methods for cleaning out the 3D models and improving them. I noticed on your slide you had photo bleaching and staining, but I would like to hear more about those because it could help a lot more people who just JI.
Yeah, so a big part of what I was doing is actually using that 3D printing and then post-processing it. When these models come out, they're not perfect. There's a lot of support material that needs to be cleaned out. The surface is very rough. It needs to be finished before it's actually presentable. So this was actually my model, my first model that I learned all my post-processing on. It's the second iteration of it. And I just did a lot of different things. So photo bleaching is literally just putting this under UV light. I left it under for, I think, over 72 hours, and it really cleans out a lot of the yellow that I'm sure you're used to. So she does research upstairs using 3D printing to create vascular models. And that's really good for the VaroClear material. Another thing that we've been using is a clean station, which is a new method of chemically cleaning out the support material that's within the structures. So all the ventricular space within this model It's hollow now, but when it's printed out, it's filled with this gushy support material that you don't want in it. So we have a clean station now, which uses a chemical process to clean it all out, so you don't have to be ramming tools in there to scrape it out manually. With that, so you're used to using Tango Plus. It's a softer, pliable material. It comes out a little bit white, and it's too wet, so you should incubate your models after you use it. But there's a whole list of things. I can talk to you about it after. But I did a lot of things right and wrong during this, and that's kind of where that list came from. Not all those things were things that worked out. A lot of those things were reasons why I had to reprint and whatnot. But it's a whole list of processes that is good to give back to the JI so that they don't repeat mistakes. Problem.
Any further questions? Anyone? All right, well, with that. All right, I think we're good to close.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
We're really happy you came today. This is a fantastic turnout for us. It's a good way to cap off 2 months of hard work by us to see everybody here. So thank you for the support. We've got refreshments in the other room afterwards. Did you guys have any remarks or anything? No? Okay, so with that, we can go over to the actual Jacobs Institute. You can check it out, walk around. Again, thank you for coming.